All right, teacher and student friends, Kristian Kuhn coming at you, otherwise known as the Bob Rossa composition, with something pretty cool and I think very interesting and important to teach. So FRQ3 on the AP language exam is the argument portion. And typically for years, I've been teaching this course for 22 years now, I always tell my students, think in terms of your textual support, pop culture, history, literature, things of that nature. But there have been a few prompts in recent memory that really force the kids to talk about themselves, to use their life experience as textual support. And when I read those responses, oftentimes I find them to be a little too cringeworthy. The kids sound very young, very immature, kind of like I'm reading a long line of LOLs and, emoji faces. They just don't sound sophisticated and academic enough. So in this writing workshop, I have a Socrates quote that I want to work with, the concept of Daimonion. And then I want to talk about how to write about the self. All right. And I'll take you through the whole writing workshop. I'll draft some introductory paragraphs for you. And then we'll focus on the syllogistic body paragraph that focuses on self. And then I'll show you how to transition from self to other. All right. Before I jump in, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's called Kristian Kuhn, the Bob Rossa composition. We are growing exponentially, which absolutely tickles me. So spread the word far and wide to your friends and colleagues. So here's the prompt that I came up with. Actually, this prompt was inspired by sitting in a yoga class, a meditation class. I heard my yogi told me this story. So it says, the Greek philosopher Socrates was found guilty of corrupting the youth of Athens and introducing strange gods. Consequently, he was sentenced to death by the drinking of poison. Though he had a number of opportunities to escape his death by renouncing his beliefs, he steadfastly refused to do so. When his heartbroken followers asked why he did not flee his sentence, Socrates answered that he always listened to his conscience, and his conscience would not allow him to be untruthful. Socrates referred to the voice of his conscience as Daimonion, translated as a divine something. Socrates was listening to the voice from within through the medium of his own soul. And then it goes on here. Our souls are always whispering to us, guiding us, and communicating a hidden source of wisdom to us. But are we listening? Do we want to listen? Are we capable? So here's what students need to do. In your first body paragraph, reflect upon a moment in your life whereby you either honored or disregarded the decree of your daimonion. Discuss the forces at play that swayed your decision-making. And your second body paragraph, choose an individual who did the same, either listened to or turned a deaf ear to their daimonion. This figure can be historical, fictional, pop cultural, etc. So clearly I'm getting kids to the point where I want them to talk about themselves. But I got to teach them how to do that, right? Because left to their own devices, oftentimes I don't like the quality of the writing. I don't like the voice. I don't like the presentation of self. It sounds a little too young, I guess is the best word. So in this essay, we're going to declare or invert the thesis, right? So we're going 4 sentences for our introductory paragraph. I'll model that. We're going to keep the argument central in the first premise and hold true to your promises. That's 3 sentences for the first sentence, the first premise of the syllogism. We're going to proceed syllogistically throughout our paragraph. So we're going to go 10 to 12 sentences. Total of 4 paragraphs. Intro, 2 bodies, 1 body about self, 1 paragraph about other, and then a conclusion paragraph. And I'll walk you through the whole thing, right? I'm going to Bob Ross how to do this for you. So the first question becomes this: how do I write the intro? And as always, I tote this adage around. You got to Bob Ross your instruction. In order for this to make sense, I'm going to give students and teachers, if you want to learn how to use my heuristics, 3 exemplars on how I would pull the strings of this. And it'll perfectly elucidate things for you so that you can be independent and on your own. Here's the kicker, though. As far as declarative and inverted go, I want to keep things easy and simple for this particular writing workshop. So I'm going to eliminate the declarative and exclusively go inverted. Here's what I mean by that. In the inverted thesis, you end with the thesis. So the last of your 4 sentences is going to be the placement of the thesis. You're gonna situate it right there. You got to provide some context, background, kind of get to the universal truth of what Socrates is saying and unpack his diction, unpack the prompt. You got to have some tier 2 level vocabulary in this. It is an academic paper, so I just mean your average run-of-the-mill SAT level caliber words. And then if you get into my YouTube channel, I have a lot of videos with Word Study Academy exercises and Nuance Academy exercises. And in particular, in the Nuance Academy, I focus a lot on sentence constructs, the idea that there's 12 sentence types and 20 sentence patterns. So I'm going to try to be a syntactical ninja in this and get kind of twisted and fancy and trick-orated to show you some good writing. So in the end, this is what we're going to do. It's 3 plus 1, right? We're going to have 3 sentences, context and background, universal truth, universal theme, unpack the prompt. Last sentence is going to be the thesis statement. So let's see what that looks like on paper. Here's the first one. I'll read it and then I'll unpack it to you and explain my logic behind it, my decision making. So here it is. The evolution of a soul's purity is not predicated on the opinions and assumptions of others, but instead by the heartbeat of conscience. Silently whispering a narrative backdrop in the life of every individual, a voice pulls in both directions. This divine something, or Daimonion, is what ultimately fashions the essence of the morally elite and spiritually damned. In every regard, this is the case not only in the life of the likes of Paramahamsa Yogananda, but in my life as well. All right, so let's talk about these first 3 sentences and the moves here. So this is what I mean by like the universal truth, the universal theme, but unpack the prompt. In the prompt, there's words, there's key moments in the diction, and I sprinkled it in here. It's really hard to get to a thesis if you don't focus on things like conscience, daimonion, you got to focus on that, and like the spiritual and moral component of what Socrates is saying, that divine something. So you can see that I sprinkled all that language in the first 3 sentences. In the first 3 sentences, my vocab is up. I got good words like purity, predicated, that's all fine and dandy. Backdrop. So you don't have to overdo it, but keep it up, right? Keep the vocab up so that you sound academic. Last sentence, let's talk about this. This is what I mean by inverting, and it's kind of like a front-loading sentence too. I call it it's a thesis that drops the seeds of the line of reasoning. So let's read this sentence again. In every regard, this is the case not only in the life of the likes of Paramahamsa Yogananda, but in my life as well. So look at the seeds that got dropped there. Now we got to grow those in the body paragraphs. It therefore necessitates that I have a paragraph about myself and a paragraph about Paramahamsa Yogananda, right? That's what I mean by front loading. So my students do that in their introductory paragraphs when they bust out the inverted thesis for FRQ 3. Might be confusing, might be a little pie in the sky and wavy gravy, so let's do it again. This is why I Bob Ross, so it completely demystifies things. Again, I'll read the whole thing from top to bottom. Note the similarity, note the pattern between 1 and 2. At any given point in a person's life, there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither easy nor popular, but must be taken because it's the decree of one's conscience beckoning. This still quiet voice is at the fabric of basic morality, even the essential core of humanity's heartbeat. While some willfully adhere to the dictates of their Daimonion, some turn a deaf ear and unfortunately choose a different, less moral course for their life's trajectory. Personally, in my own life, I've come to know of this tug and pull, much in the same way as Robin Williams did. So I'll start from the end this time. Do you see how the last sentence mirrors the last sentence from exemplar number 1? So again, you drop the seeds of the line of reasoning and name your body paragraphs, right? And that constitutes a thesis statement as well. So I'm going to write a paragraph about myself and a paragraph about Robin Williams. So in the first 3 sentences, you see me doing the tricks that I was doing in exemplar number 1 with the language from the prompt. So I threw Daimonion in there, right? I'm talking about conscience. I'm talking about the still, quiet voice. And all those things I'm just stealing from the prompt, right? To get anchored in the prompt is to get anchored in the thesis statement. So my vocab is up, got good verbiage in there. Sentence constructs are all varied. I don't have any redundancy at sentence level whatsoever, no parallelism. And that's exactly how you cook up an FRQ 3 introductory paragraph. Let's paint one more together just to really shore this up and ensure that we're all on the right page, same page. So here it is from the top. One's conscience is the equivalent of life's final accounting scale. On one hand, it measures traits like honesty and selfishness. On the other, greed and dishonesty. Endowed in every man, woman, and child is an audible voice that is akin to a GPS system to navigate us through the rights and wrongs of life. Given that all life is endowed with the gift of free choice, the beckoning voice of one's Daimonion can either steer an individual to moral high ground or moral bankruptcy. From my own personal experience to the life events of the likes of Matthew Perry, these ideas are clearly at play. Now, I want to talk about a couple of things here in addition to breaking down the heuristic. So I tell my kids this. I think it really benefits them to be original. And as a class, when we were talking about possibilities for, the self, writing about the self, but writing about other people throughout Rosa Parks, Gandhi, MLK, JFK. And I'm like, no. Like, you have to ask yourself the question, what's every other kid in the nation going to write about? And I always tell my kids, like, don't be a cliche. If so many other kids are going to write about it, try not to write about it. Like, if you absolutely have nothing else to say, then of course, like, you got to fulfill the demand of the assignment. But try to be original here, like Matthew Perry, Robin Williams, Paramahamsa Yogananda, right? Have good, interesting critters for your second premise, and it bodes really well. So breaking this one down, 3 sentences, context, background, universal truth, I unpack the quote. Last sentence, doing the exact same thing. Thesis, front load the line of reasoning. And I do that every single time. So that's just a straight up quintessential inverted thesis. So now we're getting to the meats and potatoes of why we're all here. How do I construct the bodies? And in particular, how do I write about the self? All right, my friends, here it is. Real quick, and I have a whole bunch of videos in my YouTube channel on this, and I want to focus on teaching how to write about the self, not necessarily my heuristics in this. So I'm going to give a real brief cursory overview of this. My students always proceed syllogistically in the body paragraphs. Comes from Aristotle, and basically he wanted his orators, his students, to be cogent in their line of reasoning, just like us composition teachers. So he told them to proceed kind of mathematically with a calculative precision. So he wanted them to go premise, conclusion. So if I say premise 1, arsenic is deadly. Premise 2, my dog ate arsenic. Conclusion, my dog is going to die. He would call that a cogent argument. Now, if we flip that and morph it into a heuristic for the purposes of FRQ3, this is what it looks like. The first premise is going to be an argument containing the verbiage of the prompt. So we still got to be talking about daimonion, conscience, things of that nature, right? You got to argue with the parlance and verbiage of the prompt of your thesis. Second premise, textual support from your head. You have no sources, right? We didn't print anything for you for this. It's coming straight from your noodle. And my keyword here is specificity. I want kids to be really detailed when they talk about themselves. And the conclusion, textual analysis. You got to link, echo, promise all the way back to the thesis, all the way back to the prompt. And the first premise is a promise. All of this takes, as I said earlier, 10 to 12 sentences. So let's talk about talking about the self. All right, here's what I call it. Calling forth the age-old owl. So I remember like at age 4, my grandma always used to say to me, Kristian, you're an age-old owl. You're wise beyond your years. And typically AP kids somewhere in their life have heard that. You're wise beyond your years. You're more mature than the other kids, right? You're an age-old owl. And I really want my students to embody fully the age-old owl in this. Sound very mature, right? Keep the vocab up, focus on those sentence constructs, but don't goon out and be contrived and pretentious. You got to stay in your wheelhouse, but very mature, like you're sitting down for a professional job interview. So let's take a look at a first premise. So again, I just argue, and I have to use the language of the prompt. So look at what I did here. By no means whatsoever am I a saint, for I have definitely stumbled a number of times in my journey. And my friends, if you're writing about the self, you got to use the first person. I know some English teachers are like, oh, Kristian, you just used I in an essay. Well, my friends, in FRQ 3, if you look at some of the prompts in recent years, sometimes the College Board is positioning our kids and forcing our kids to write about themselves. It's kind of it's unavoidable to use the I. So I'm totally fine with that. So let me take it from the top again. By no means whatsoever am I a saint, for I have definitely stumbled a number of times in my journey. But there have been quite a number of times when I listened and obeyed the voices from within. But one thing is clear. The more I wandered off course, the louder the voice of my Daimonion called to me to self-correct. There you have it. So you hear the prompt in there. You hear the thesis. And the moral of the story is simple. I've always found a greater slice of personal peace and freedom when I honored the morally correct voice from within. So it's very simple. 3-sentence move. Keep the centrality of your argument. Have no textual support in there whatsoever. Right? 4th sentence, we're going to transition to the second premise. And here's the big thing. Owl and specificity, right? Be an age-old owl. I tell my students, like, get philosophical, right? Get very mature in this, but be detailed as possible. So look at where I go in the 4th sentence, right? So this, what you're seeing on this screen is the entire second premise. I'll show you the conclusion in the next slide. Take as a case in point my 18th birthday. For whatever the reason, in the state of New York, the legislative forces that pull the strings of law deem it an appropriate time in one's life to be able to purchase lottery tickets and gamble. What I really wanted to be unwrapping was a new vehicle, but instead I got a ton of paraphernalia to the college I would be attending in the fall and the requisite chocolate and peanut butter cake my mom always baked. But the last present came from my grandfather. He reached into his wallet and pulled out 5 scratch-off lottery tickets and handed me a quarter to do the deed. In the backdrop of this moment is the reality that we buried my grandmother the week before and that my family was struggling to come up with a way to pay for her funeral expenses and remaining healthcare costs that had accrued over the course of her stay at a nursing facility. While I scratched each ticket, I was hoping to win a bit of money to help me toward purchasing a car. Ticket number 1 yielded me $1. Ticket number 2 and 3 were duds. But to everyone's surprise, the last remaining ticket was a $50,000 jackpot winner. But my Daimonion immediately told me that I could not pocket this money selfishly for myself. I needed to help alleviate my grandfather's financial woes first and foremost. This singular ticket would cover all of the expenses he had incurred, plus it would give my grandfather the necessary funds to do much needed home repairs. So what do I do in the second premise, right? You can see my vocab is up, but again, I'm not gooning out, right? The idea is not to use $1 million words that, somehow using $1 million words is the equivalent of good writing. That's absolutely not the case. I want to disabuse teachers and students of that notion. But my vocab's up, my sentence constructs are advanced, and I'm staying anchored in the prompt, right? You always got to stay anchored in the prompt. So I'm telling my students, in the first premise, you probably want to use the keywords. Second premise, you want to use the keywords. In the conclusion, you definitely want to be using the keywords. So let's wrap this up, right? You got to conclude the thought. You got to throw a little conclusion on this. You just can't end in the middle. So it takes usually 2 sentences to wrap up a syllogism. So here it is. And again, I need to recycle the language of the prompt. The voice in my head never flinched. This money was not mine to selfishly spend for my pleasure and want. Instead, a certain divine something gave me clarity to do what is right. So this is what I did. And you're done. That's a whole syllogism. And if students can speak like that and carry that kind of cadence, that kind of, pose and posture, it's going to bode well for them on the exam, right? So very polished, job interview type thing. Elevate the vocab, work on those sentence constructs, but specificity is key in there. So students might be wondering, teachers as well, what do I do next? It's very easy. You bust out another syllogism. It's a 4-paragraph essay. So first paragraph, you're going to write about the self. And then the second body paragraph, you're going to write about other. So let me show you how I transition into that. So the first premise is always 3 sentences. Fourth sentence, you get into your textual support. And I'm not going to write the whole paragraph for you. I'm just going to show you how I transition in and then into the second premise. So free will endows man with a tug of war pull of conscience between good and bad. So you can see there, I'm borrowing the language of the prompt again. Oftentimes, decisions come down to either choosing vice or virtue. And almost uniformly in life and literature, those who listen and abide by the gentler voices go on to be the real change makers of the world. So I got it. My argument's there. I'm anchored in the prompt. Now I got to transition into my textual support. So look at this one. Yogananda, a Kriya yogi who bridged Eastern and Western philosophical and religious thought in the early to mid 20th century, and boom, off I go. So I have to talk about Yogananda's Daimonion, right, in order to keep my line of reasoning throughout the rest of this. And again, I'm shooting for 10 to 12 sentences. Specificity is key, but so is staying anchored in the prompt. And in the conclusion, I'm going to recycle or regurgitate the language of the prompt, the thesis, and tie it all back. So let's talk about wrapping up this essay. We need a conclusion paragraph. And voila, some of you that are familiar with my work are going to say, he did it again. There are some conclusion stems for you. My students just take 3 to 4 sentences to wrap it up. I always kind of make the comparison that a conclusion paragraph is like the grand finale of a fireworks display. Hit me with theme, hit me with exigence, big idea, universal truth. So some of our favorite stems are simply said, and off you go. Evidentially, in no other words, when it's all said and done at the end of the day, right? So you kind of got to choose a stem for the seriousness of the subject matter, right? If you're writing about something flip, and casual, then choose a casual stem. If it's more academic, choose one of the more serious-minded stems, and you'll be all good to go. All right, I'm signing off. Happy teaching, happy writing, students and teachers. Note that if you need to drop me an email, I can be reached at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. I always answer my emails. I love to hear from students and teachers, and it delights me when you guys reach out to me. Note, I'm a lead teacher for the National Writing Project. I present for NCTE typically every year, and sometimes for the College Board. My website there, teachinghowtowrite.com, has a calendar of my comings and goings. So most of our PD is for free. Some of it's for a nominal fee. So just see what's available, and if it floats your boat, come join us. For students, note that I have my own tutoring company called Write at Ivy Write. I'm a pro when it comes time to the college application process. I used to work college admissions at Brown, and I can really help you guys crank stellar personal statements and supplements. So when you get to that point of your life, if you want someone to look over your shoulder and guide you, give me an email and we can talk about the specifics of your needs and what I can offer. That's it from here. Be well. I'll hit you with more writing workshops in the days, weeks, and years to come. Be well.